Staten Island, the one borough the rest of New York City couldn't give less of a fuck about. They have a rail line that's way more different than the rest of the cities, and frankly it's really cool if I do say so myself. It's called the Staten Island Railway, running from St. George on the northeastern point of the island all the way south to the Tottenville neighborhood in the southwest, spanning 14 miles along the island's interior. It's been known for years to use the oldest active subway cars in New York City's fleet, the legendary R44s from the early 1970s. But since they were recently retired, what did they use before they came along? Well, let's talk about that. The SIRR is actually one of the oldest known forms of public transportation in New York City, being incorporated as the Staten Island Railroad way back in 1851, and it was operated in cooperation with the legendary Baltimore and Ohio Railroad after 1885. Yes, that B&O. It began operations in 1860, and the main line was fully completed by 1886. Expansions quickly came as time progressed. By the late 1880s, two new branch lines had begun operation, one running along the island's north shore from St. George to the Arlington neighborhood, and another one breaking off from the main line at Clifton and running towards the island's south shore, terminating at Wentworth Avenue, just a bit south from the Arrochar neighborhood. Since the rest of New York City didn't use fully electric third rail trains until 1904, you're probably asking yourself, what did Staten Island use? Well, they used small steam locomotives. The rest of the city used tiny steam locomotives on their elevated lines until around 1903, but the ones on Staten Island stuck around for a lot longer. Staten Island steam locomotives were dinky little 440 Camelback types that hauled the daily trains along the railway's three lines. While the rest of New York City got rid of their rapid transit steam locomotives by 1903, the Staten Island ones lasted all the way until 1925, when the Kaufman Act was signed by Governor Al Smith, mandating that all railroads in New York City, including the Staten Island Rapid Transit, as it was then known, to be electrified by January 1st, 1926. As a result, the B&O drew up electrification plans for the SIRT. The plans were approved by the Public Service Commission on May 1st, 1924, and construction began on August 1st of that year. The very last SIRT steam locomotive was retired from mainline service by the end of 1925, but some sources say a few lasted in switching service all the way up until 1946, when they were replaced by diesel Alco switchers. By the way, I forgot to mention this, but from 1900 to 1913, the Pennsylvania Railroad had control over the B&O, which apparently brought massive amounts of profit for the Staten Island Railway because one, it allowed for huge expansions, and it allowed for them to stay competitive. With electrification coming around for the island, a new tunnel was anticipated that would connect the railway with the BMT 4th Avenue line, so they used third rail electrification as the primary power source for all three of the SIRR lines. However, the tunnel had never been built. They still, however, ordered new electric cars to take over for the railroad now that the steam locomotives were off of passenger duties. Since the tunnel was supposed to connect the SIRR to the BMT 4th Avenue line in Brooklyn, the B&O needed new cars to be built to BMT specifications. Enter the Standard Steel Car Company, which gladly fulfilled the B&O's order of 100 new cars. 90 were powered units and 10 were trailing units, and they were called the ME1s. Because of the BMT specs, they largely resembled the AB standard cars used on the other subway lines. The ME1s quickly invaded Staten Island, taking over all three lines by 1926, shortly after full electrification, according to Third Rail Online. The ME1 cars actually had a nickname because of their size. They were called the B-29s by the crews, which is a reference to the Boeing B-29 Superfortress for all you planeformers out there. They were actually crazy long too. The ME1's dimensions were 67 feet and 3 inches in length, a width of 10 feet, and a height of 12 feet and 1 inch. The motored cars ran on 600 volt direct current traction and ran with a third rail shoe. They were fitted with two GE 282A electric motors with 1-inch truck. Each electric motor had 200 horsepower. They also had a top operating speed of 60 miles per hour. The ME1s actually had a major event in 1953. What happened? Staten Island's two branch lines were both shut down, both the North Shore and the South Beach branch lines. Because of this, the SIRT sold 25 ME1 cars to the New York City subway for use on the Culver line after extensive modifications. The SIRT ME1s first appeared on the New York City subway running between Ditmas Avenue and Chambers Street on weekdays, and as a shuttle between Ditmas Avenue and 36th Street at other times. When the Culver line was reduced to just a shuttle in 1959, some cars were used on the Franklin Avenue shuttle for a time, until modified low-V cars replaced them on both shuttle routes. For the rest of their time on the subway, they were apparently put on local service on the West End line. They were replaced by the R27 and R30 cars by 1961 respectively. Back on Staten Island, only 48 remaining ME1s soldiered on, powering the mainline trains from St. George to Tottenville. This is because, unfortunately, in 1962, a fire happened near SIRR's Clifton Yard, destroying 7 of the ME1 cars, adding to 13 lost in 2 previous fires and 2 that were scrapped. Because of this shortage, 44 of the remaining 48 cars were only used during the rush hours, making basically no room for errors according to Wikipedia. The cars apparently had to be more carefully maintained because of the sudden service changes. During the evening rush, some trains would deadhead back to St. George and return to Tottenville as locals to make up for the lack of train cars available. The SIRR was practically desperate for new equipment at this point, so much so that they looked back to the NYCTA and theorized purchasing the 9 BMT standard cars they had sidelined for a possible transfer. They also thought about buying some old D-type cars. However, none of these proposals were acted upon according to Wikipedia. In 1967, the current mayor at the time, John Lindsay, apparently proposed buying the futuristic-looking train cars used for the Expo 67 in Montreal on the Expo Express service. However, this didn't come into fruition either, because apparently they would have arrived by October of that year, which is after the Expo ended. In 1971, the MTA fully took control of the SIRT as granted permission by the Interstate Commerce Commission. They paid the B&O $3.5 million for the line's equipment, according to the New York Times. By this time, the St. Louis Car Company was still building the R44 subway cars that would replace the majority of the older fleet on the subway. In 1972, New York's much bigger and busier island railway, the Long Island Railroad, loaned 2 3-car sets of their 1955-built air-conditioned MP-72 EMUs, also known as the ACMU on Metro North, to be tested on the main line. The cars apparently only made one round trip in the morning peak and another round trip in the afternoon peak. According to the New York Times, as a result of previous tests, the edges of the platforms at St. George were trimmed for the extra clearance required by the LIRR cars, which were 85 feet long. The cars were only 15 feet longer than the 45 ME1 cars still in operation, but had a seating capacity of 123 passengers, almost double the capacity of the other coaches. The MP-52s were eventually sent back to the LIRR before the next year. By 1973, the SIRR changed forever, with the introduction of the legendary, but frankly kinda troubling, R44 subway cars built by the St. Louis Car Company. The first 6 cars entered service on February 28th of that year, finally letting the remaining ME1 cars retire after almost 50 years of service. The ME1 cars would be completely off of Staten Island by the end of 1973. Most were sent for scrap, but 2 survived. Car number 388 is currently on display at the Shoreline Trolley Museum in East Haven, Connecticut, and car number 366 is on display at the Seashore Trolley Museum, which is all the way up in Kennebunkport, Maine. Car number 353 apparently also survived, but according to Wikipedia, it was scrapped in 2004 before it could be transported to its forever home at the Trolley Museum of New York in Kingston. From there, the R44s powered the SIRR for about the same time as the ME1s did. Entering service in 1973, they weren't completely retired until earlier this year, and even then, I think a few are still around and only run as needed and are apparently ridiculously rare now, but don't quote me on that. The ME1s had a lifespan of 48 years in service, while the R44s had 52 years of work on their belt before being retired off of mainline service. The R44s became what the SIRR was later known for using by 2010, as the R44s were now the oldest active subway cars in the fleet when the R46 cars were getting retired. The R44s were pulled off of subway service in 2010. Now, if any R44s are left, they apparently only run when absolutely necessary, as the whole fleet was replaced by more modern Kawasaki R211S type subway cars, and have been in service on Staten Island for a bit over a year now. Today, the R211S cars are likely the only cars you'll see running when you take the Staten Island Railway now. They take care of both express and local trains throughout the day. There's maybe a chance you could find an R44 sitting at one of the 10 unused yard platforms at the St. George Terminal, but don't quote me on that. I haven't been in a while. The SIRR has had an interesting past, to say the least, being it's one of the oldest known modes of public transit in New York City. It's had a lot of diverse equipment as well, from running tiny 440 Camelbacks as main power until the 1920s when electrification happened, mainly for a tunnel that never got built. The blue, rattly ME1 cars took care of passenger duties all the way up until the 70s when they were replaced by the R44s, which didn't retire a whole 52 years after they entered service. The R44s were replaced by the modern R211S cars of today, and those still run on the main line of New York's other island railway. Thanks a ton for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good day.